second in the series of webinars hosted by the European Commission Urban Development Network to explore sustainable urban development. My name is Sally Nishaw, and I'm happy to be your moderator today and to take you through the next 2 hours. This series of webinars is based on the Handbook published by the Joint Research Centre with 6 building blocks for sustainable urban development in cohesion policy. Last week, we had the first webinar on the first building block, strategy, and the presentations and recordings for that webinar are now online on the UDN website. Today, we're going to look at territorial focus, how to define the spatial dimension for your urban strategy. The purpose of all these webinars is to deepen our understanding of sustainable urban development by looking at some of the theory and practice. So we'll hear about some of the principles and recommendations in the handbook. Then we're going to hear from 3 city cases that illustrate some of that work in action. And we're also going to hear a bit more about the future of cohesion policy and what that means for a territorial focus in future programming periods. So let's look at the programme for the next 2 hours. You can see we're going to start with an introduction to sustainable urban development strategies, the handbook, and a little bit deeper onto territorial focus with Carlotta Fioretti, who's from the Joint Research Centre. Then we're going to have a check-in with you about what territorial focus means for you, with my co-moderator Ed Adams asking you some polling questions. Then we'll have the first of our learning from practice contributions from Sonia Rajkova from the city of Brno in the Czech Republic, and she'll talk a bit about functional urban areas and reflecting on metropolitan cooperation in her city of Brno. And then we're going to stop for some reactions from our rapporteur, who is Ivan Tosic from the Metropolitan Research Institute in Budapest, Hungary, from you, the audience, and also from our representative of the European Commission today, who's Peter Takac, who will talk a bit more about the Commission's response and what the future looks like in cohesion policy. At around 11 o'clock, we're going to take a 5-minute break so you can have a stretch, take a cup of coffee. Then we'll come back with our second learning from practice contribution. That will be from Joanna Brzezinska from the city of Łódź in Poland. And Joanna is going to talk about neighbourhood approaches, looking at area and people-based urban regeneration. And then our third and final city case will come from the city of Murcia in Spain, from Casper van Hout, and he's going to talk about urban-rural linkages and how the city connects to its hinterland through its sustainable urban strategy. Again, we'll take some reactions from you, the audience, from our rapporteur and from the Commission, and then we'll finish with a look into the future at the new programming period, again with Peter Takac. So that's our programme for today. Before we go further, I just want to make a couple of comments about the WebEx platform. You'll be on mute throughout the webinar, but please feel free to add your comments and questions in the chat box on the right-hand side. We'll take a break at various moments to feed those questions and comments back in to the speakers and contributors. So we really want to hear from you what you think about this, what's happening in your city, and how you relate to the contributions in the webinar. And we'll also ask you to join in some polling. So right now, I'm really happy to hand over to my co-moderator, Eddie Adams, who's going to start up with the polling and getting you involved in these questions about territorial focus. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks a lot, Sally. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you with us for this second webinar. As Sally said, we're going to do a little bit of polling. We'll also be using the chat bar to involve you in today's conversation. But first of all, let's just have a basic question. Let's just find out who's in the room and maybe which room you're in. So first of all, let's just go to the first of these questions, please, Vasilis. Let's ask our audience. So a very simple question. Were you with us for this first webinar on strategy? Sally just mentioned that we kicked off last week. So how many of you were involved in that first session? Useful for us to know whether you're coming in fresh and new today or whether you're already in the groove and you understand the kind of format we'll be using today. So let's just allow a few more seconds for you to respond to that question, and then we'll pop the answers on the screen. Okay, maybe let's pop that on the screen so we can see what the audience response was to that first question. Okay, so we can see there that in fact almost more than a third of you were with us last week. 35% yes, 18% no. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to see that doesn't add up to 100. So we've got a few people who are not quite with us yet. So please jump into the conversation as we have our second question this morning. The second question is about to appear on the screen. And it's really all about which hat you're wearing. So are you today joining us from a managing authority or maybe an IB, an intermediate body for relation to EU funds? Do you have a national responsibility, maybe a ministry or a national agency? We expect quite a lot of you have city hats on, a city perspective, so please let us know. And then you can see from the other options in the list, we've also got maybe some regional people, NGOs, researchers, some private sector people, I'm sure, maybe some others. If you're other and you're not on that list, please let us know where you're from. I'll just let that run for a little bit longer so people can just choose which of those options. I think we've only got one option for this one, so some of you might combine those roles, but we're asking you just to tell us what your main thing is, so we have an idea of who's in the audience today. A couple more seconds for that one, and then we'll pop the responses on the screen. Okay, so let's go to the results, please. Let's have a look and see. Okay, so the nice instant pie chart there for us to help us process some of those answers. So you can see the biggest single group, 18% city authority people, 12% from managing authorities. If you combine the two of those, we're up to 30%. So almost a third of you from those two. But you can also see a really good spread actually. 11% from national ministries or from national bodies. We've got quite a few regional people here today as well, some private sector. So again, almost 10%, 8% from university or research bodies, maybe involved in doing some of the analysis, evaluation of the funds we're going to be talking about and the approaches we're talking about. So thanks for that. Good to see the spread of our audience. That's very helpful for our speakers. Let's just jump to the third and final question of this opening suite of polls. And I think the reason why we're having these webinars in this format, the reason why we're not meeting face to face is, of course, because we are all in the midst of a pandemic across the world, not just Europe. That has really shaken up the way we do things. And many of you will be joining us from another location than your office. But some of you might actually still be in the office. You might be back in the office. You may never have left the office, a few of you. So again, just to get a flavour of how things are. So are you joining us from home? As you can see, I'm joining from home today. Are you in the office still? Are you joining us from a cafe or a hotspot? Or maybe some other location? So again, just to get a sense of a snapshot of what our normal day-to-day reality looks like. Let us know how you're connecting this morning. I'll just let that run again for a couple of more seconds, and then we'll pop the responses on the screen. Okay, so let's see the results, please, for that final question in our opening set of polls. Okay, so yeah, more than half of us joining from home, the remainder joining from the office. So interestingly, maybe more than I would have expected, 40% actually joining from the office. So that's probably encouraging. I hope it's encouraging in terms of the direction of travel. But that's a useful split for us to see, and it gives us a good sense of just where we are, because obviously Europe is very diverse and we are in different situations across the continent depending on where you are. Okay, thanks a lot for that. We'll be coming back shortly with a second set of polls linked to today's topic. That's in time enough for me. I'll hand back to Sally. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks so much. We'll be coming back to you later for more inputs from the polls and from the audience. Interesting to see who we've got on board today from different levels of government and different institutions, and also joining from home. So wherever you are, thank you for joining us. We look forward to the next 2 hours of interesting contributions and debate. So let's get started with that now. Our first speaker this morning is going to set the scene for us about sustainable urban development, the handbook generally, and then have a bit more of a focus on the spatial dimension. So I'm very happy to hand the floor to Carlotta Fioretti, who's a research fellow at the Joint Research Centre and one of the authors of the handbook. So over to you, Carlotta, to start the conversation this morning.
Thank you, Sally. Good morning, everybody. I will not use the video because of these technical problems, but I hope that you can hear me well. My name is Carlotta Fioretti. I'm a scientific officer at the Joint Research Centre, and I will talk to you today about the Handbook of Sustainable Urban Development Strategies. As Sally said at the beginning of the webinar, this series of webinars are organized by the Urban Development Network, which is a network promoted by DG Regio that connects more than 500 cities across the EU involved in integrated sustainable urban development. And one of the main aim of this network is to foster dialogue between cities and with the European Commission. So it is in this spirit that this series of webinars has been organized. JRC, the Joint Research Centre, is a co-organizer. For who doesn't know the JRC, it is the science hub of the European Commission, and its mission is that of promoting knowledge and the methodological support for policymaking. In particular, when we talk about policymaking in terms of urban development, there are two main tools that the JRC has developed in collaboration with DG Regio in the past few years. The first one is a Stratboard, which is an interactive mapping tool that is aimed at visualizing all urban and territorial strategies implemented across the EU during this programming period. So if you want to see if in your city, in your urban areas, there is a strategy of urban development supported by the cohesion policy, you can go into this website and look at it. The second main tool is the Handbook of Sustainable Urban Development Strategies. It is a handbook, as the title says. It is a document, but now it is also a web page that you can visit. Here there is the link in this slide. And well, this kind of web page will be updated in the future. More content will put there, so keep an eye on the web page, please. What are the main objectives of this webinar of today and more in general of the series of webinar? So first of all, to augment our knowledge, both in theory and in practice, thanks to our speakers today, on integrated sustainable urban development. To have some understanding of the handbook, of how it works, the handbook, and in particular to dive into one of its chapters that today is the Territorial Focus one. And finally, very important, to reinforce a community of practice that is the UDN. So I invite you to be engaged during the webinar and to write in the chat comments or question, because this is the spirit of the webinar, is to engage everyone into a conversation. For who didn't participate to the first webinar, I will give to you now some key information on what is the handbook. So first of all, the handbook, it is a policy learning tool that was written during this programming period, but it is valid also for the upcoming one. It is not a binding regulation. It is not, let's say, a strict guidance, but is something complementary to that. It is structured into 6 chapters, 6 building blocks that represent, let's say, the main principle of the EU integrated approach to urban development. One of those building blocks is, in fact, territorial focus, that is at the core of the webinar of today. The targets of the handbook are cities, local authorities, but also managing authorities and all the other actors, stakeholders involved in the process of sustainable urban development under the cohesion policy. The main aim of the handbook is to help tackling most critical and recurrent issues and challenges that may arise during the process of designing or implementing a strategy. And it does so providing several types of different resources. First of all, examples from good practice of local authorities or managing authorities that have dealt already with those challenges. It provides you also data, mainly derived from the Stratboard web tool, and also external resources and very important recommendation. So let's go into the core of the webinar of today, that is the territorial focus. What is a territorial focus? The handbook gives you some information on what we mean by territorial focus. Well, in the current and also next regulation, ERDF support any kind of urban areas. So it is very important to choose appropriately the scale and the type of territory which the strategy target. In fact, it's important to specify that challenges and opportunities has a specific spatial dimension. So in order to decide which type of territory you want to focus on, it's important to have a diagnostic of what are the challenges and opportunities of your urban area. And then it is very important to say that this kind of choice, it's a key policy choice that has methodological and strategic implication. If we look at that board, we can see a little bit what has been the current situation for urban strategies in terms of territorial focus. So during this programming period, the majority of strategies target a city or a town, 38%. Then there are 27% of strategies that are targeting neighborhoods. That means an area within administrative boundaries or more than one areas, in fact. 17% targets functional urban areas. That means multiple municipalities that are connected through functional links. And then we have a 3% that include other categories like city network. Another interesting thing is to see a little bit how the different member states endorses different type of territorial focuses. And in fact, we can see that, for example, there are some member states such as France, Italy, or Spain that has several strategies targeting neighborhoods. And this is also maybe related to their previous experience in the urban community initiative. There are many other countries that has strategies targeting functional urban areas. And in particular, we can see that there are higher investment in functional urban areas in some countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, or Slovakia. The handbook highlights three types of different issues that we consider as important, because more recurrent or more critical. The first main target is about, in fact, targeting neighborhoods. Why this is important to focus on that? Well, because this is an approach that can be particularly useful to concentrate resources in a defined area and solve complex urban problems in an integrated way. And let's remind that the integrated approach is one of the key of this EU approach to sustainable urban development. This type of approaches are defined as area-based approach. approaches. At the same time, it's important also to highlight that there are some possible shortcomings of this type of approaches, and the handbook describes those. So, what are the main challenges when we adopt an area-based approach? Well, there are some challenges, especially in terms of when it is more appropriate to choose this type of territorial focus. And among the recommendations that you can find in the handbook, you can find that the area-based approach is better to use when the strategy aims to address specific local challenges which directly affect local communities, such as, for example, in the case of the private neighborhood, multiple problems interconnecting in terms of social problems, or also in terms of the quality of the public space, environmental problems, and economic problems. So we will learn a little bit something about that thanks to the experience of the city of Łódź in Poland. A representative from the city of Łódź will speak later about their approach to neighborhood regeneration. The second issue that you can find treated in the handbook is talks about the functional area approach. Why this is especially important? Well, because in many urban areas across Europe, we can see today a kind of a spatial mismatch, in the sense that there is a larger number of people who live in functional urban areas, so in the municipalities that are in the hinterland of some urban areas, than the people that effectively live in the core city. That means that there are many people that lives in those municipalities, but at the same time that commutes for work to the core city or for services and other kind of necessities. So it is important to adopt a functional area approach in this case and to foster cooperation among municipalities, especially in those member states where intermunicipal cooperation is absent. So one of the challenges is how to achieve cooperation among actors, among municipalities, when there is not a pre-existing framework. In the handbook, you can find several recommendations. First of all, to create a governance system that enable policy coherence in fragmented areas, and this can be done in two different ways, through institutional processes or through a procedural approach. Another important recommendation is that sustainable urban development financial opportunities can help start the process of intermunicipal cooperation, but this should continue also beyond the scope of sustainable urban development. And this is precisely the case of the Brno metropolitan area in the Czech Republic. We will hear from our speaker later on about this specific case. And you can find also more information on the Brno case in the handbook. Let's go into the third and final issue, that it's about urban-rural linkages. Why it is especially important to talk about urban-rural linkages? Because the distinction between urban and rural today is blurring. And there is a complex set of bidirectional linkages that connect urban and rural areas. We are talking, for example, about labor market flows, public service provision, mobility, environmental and cultural services, leisure assets. So how is it possible to promote urban-rural linkages within a city strategy? And this is especially the case of many middle or small size cities across the EU, which has a urban dense core, and then has many kind of rural areas that surround this urban core. Why this kind to strengthen these linkages is challenges? Because sometimes you have to deal with heterogeneous priorities for urban and rural areas within the same strategy. So our recommendation is to promote urban-rural linkages in towns of all sizes whenever a physical or functional connection between urban and rural areas occurs. And in order to do that, you can, for example, adopt a multi-project and widespread approach within an holistic strategy. And this is precisely the case of the SUD strategy of Murcia in Spain, which promoted different type of project that foster urban-rural linkages in terms of quality of the public space, in the revitalization of a riverbank, in terms of a circular economy, and also in terms of culture. So thank you for the attention, and I'm sorry because of the issue of connection that we had at the beginning. I hope that everything is solved now. If you want to have more information on the handbook, you can look at the website. Here there is the link. We will put it also in the chat box later, or you can write at my email. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlotta, for that really great introduction to the topic of territorial focus within the context of the JRC Handbook. And we'll hear a bit more about each of those examples now in the next hour or so, which will illustrate in a little more depth the principles that Carlotta has been talking about. And Carlotta will bring you back in at various moments in the next 90 minutes for your comments and reactions to those cases. And please feel free to also put as an audience member, put your questions and comments into the chat bar. We're really happy to hear what you think, and if there's anything that's not clear to you, or ways in which the Urban Development Network can help you more in terms of getting the right territorial spatial dimension for your local area. But now I'm going to hand back over to Ed, and we're going to do another poll to find out a bit more about your own focus, your own territorial focus, and what your local challenges are. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks a lot, Sally, and thanks for your patience, everyone, this morning. This is one of the joys of online working. I'm sure you've all been in this situation, so we keep our fingers crossed that things are stabilised. Thanks, Carlotta, for setting the scene for us. And we'd like to come out to you again with another poll again, a little bit more specifically focused this time. I'm really just trying to get to grips with your own views on this question of territoriality that Carlotta has introduced for us this morning. I think the last polls were right in the middle of our technical hiccup, so the timing wasn't quite right. So let's just have another go, and hopefully this time there'll be enough time for you to respond. Can we pop the first question up, please, in the chat bar? So here we are. So the question this time, the first one is really thinking about, for your work and thinking about your own situation, which of these levels is most relevant in your work and the projects you're involved in. You can only answer for one of these. So if you're working on all levels, you will have to prioritize, I'm afraid. But we'd like to know which of these levels, and Carlotta has introduced the different spatial concepts we'll be talking about: the neighbourhood, the administrative level, the city or the town, this functional urban area, which we'll be hearing more about from the Brno presentation shortly, the regional perspective, or is it other? Because we know we have some national people on the call. So just take a minute, please, just to let us know which of these is the most relevant in the work that you do. And I know that this might not fit for everyone, and it's a little bit clunky, but it will give us a flavour, give our speakers an idea of what matters most in the work that you're doing. So I'm just looking a little bit more time to go on that. Vasilis, so has everyone? Okay, let's have a look. Okay, interesting. So again, corresponding to the earlier results, where most of our the single biggest group are city people.
Again, it's the city, the town area, the administrative area that's the highest of the ones who have answered. Almost half of you haven't answered. So again, maybe that's because it doesn't quite fit with your role. But if it does, then please participate, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. 17% of you working at the functional urban area level. That's always interesting to see. A bit surprisingly, for only 6% for them is the neighbourhood level is the most important. So maybe that's because you're working on all different levels and you have to prioritise there. Let's go to the next question in this suite of questions, which is linked to our theme today. This is a longer question and might take you a little while to read the question, but let me just pick out the gist of it. So thinking about the projects you work on, to what respect is there a mismatch, a disconnection between the administrative boundary and the real lives of citizens? So we know that sometimes people live in one area, they work in another, they're crossing these lines all of the time. The notion of the functional urban area is a kind of a more realistic picture of people's living and working patterns in a territory. So to what extent is this a serious mismatch in the work that you do, where really the fit is not at all consistent? Is it some mismatch, a minor issue, where some people are crossing these lines, these boundary lines, but not so many? Or is it a pretty good fit? In some cases, you might have a nice, neat territorial fit between your administrative area and your functional area. I wonder how typical that is. So those are the three options. So one where it's a serious mismatch, one where it's a kind of 50-50, I guess, it's not a major issue. And the third one, C, is where the fit is contiguous, coterminous, if you like, where the administrative area and the functional area are pretty much one and the same. So I think we've hopefully had enough time on that one. Okay, again, no answer. So maybe these questions are a little bit too, maybe they're challenging for our audience in terms of choosing one over another. But of the people who responded, the biggest answer is the fit is not perfect, but it's kind of okay. Interestingly, the smallest number of those who responded was that the fit is coterminous. It maps on exactly. So the fewest number of you have said that's the case. And you can see 15% of us are saying, yeah, it's quite a serious mismatch. Again, please feel free to elaborate on your questions in the chat. If we use technical terms or acronyms which are unfamiliar to you, there are no silly questions in these sessions. It's an opportunity to demystify and to clarify some of the terminologies that we might be using today. Let's pop on to the third and final question of this second suite of polls. This is about the barriers, and again, this might come out in some of our discussions with our speakers this morning. So what are the barriers to getting this focus right? Some of you may be going into the new programming period, recalibrating the territorial focus, and as Carlotta showed, there's a diverse picture across Europe in terms of how different member states approach this. So again, if we look at those options there, you can, on this occasion, take as many as you like. We don't just have to ask you to choose one answer. So a technical issue around capabilities, is it the inability to get the boundary lines right? Is it about the collaboration difficulties between governance levels? We'll be talking about governance in our next webinar on Friday. Is it about political conflict? Sometimes there's a conflict politically between the national, regional, and the city level. Is it a data issue? Is it about gathering evidence and data which helps us to make these informed decisions? Or is it something else? And if it's something else, please pop your answer in the chat bar. We'd love to know if we've missed something off that list that's important. Again, I'll just let that run for a couple more seconds, and then Vasilis can share the answers with us. Again, it may be all of these, and you feel free to choose more than one answer. So let's have a look and see. So question C, it's the lack of collaboration. Very interestingly, which of the answers we have is the biggest stumbling block, the biggest barrier. and then it's political conflict, which may actually be part and parcel of the same thing. So that's really, really interesting to hear. A good spread of responses there. Sally and I are very glad we have Ivan Tosic as our rapporteur today. I'm sure Ivan will have things to pick up and say about these polling responses, but that's helpful for us, helpful for our speakers. As someone said, sometimes the time limit to the answer is too short. Thanks for that. That's very helpful. We'll be debriefing after today's session, so we will tweak that for the next time around. In the meantime, I'm going to hand back to Sally. I'll keep an eye on the chat bar. Please jump in, folks, with questions, comments, and we look forward to involving you later. Thanks, Sally. Back over to you.
Thanks, Ed. Really interesting answers from the polls there. Please do join in the chat, even if you didn't answer the poll questions. Interesting that we have people from different types of areas, from cities, neighbourhoods, and regions. And also interesting that last response about the difficulties around collaboration between municipal areas. And I think we'll hear about that a bit more going forward. So now we're going to move into our first input from a city in learning from practice. I'm very happy to introduce to you Sonia Rajkova, who is the Foreign Cooperation and Marketing Specialist from the city of Brno in the Czech Republic, who's going to talk to us about their experience of having a functional urban area, how they've developed that, and how they're thinking about it going forward as well in the future. Before I hand over to Sonia, I just want to advise you all, we're going to start with a short film, an animated film. We're hoping it's going to run okay. It seems like the platform has stabilized quite well now. If it doesn't run okay, we'll stop it and cut to Sonia and she'll explain the animation in brief. But if you want to watch the animation, it's going to be in Czech. So you'll need, most of you, I imagine, will need the subtitles like me. And in order to view the subtitles, you'll need to go into a particular view of your screen, which is called Active Speaker Video View. So if you hover on the right-hand side of your screen, just to the left of where it says participants in the chat bar, you'll see you have the options of grid view, active speaker and thumbnail video view, and to the left, there's an icon that almost looks like a TV screen with a button on the right bottom corner. It's called Active Speaker Video View. Please click on that now, and that means you'll be able to see the video properly as we play it. But first of all, to introduce the video and the presentation, I'm going to hand over to Sonia. Over to you, Sonia.
Hello, my name is Sonia. I am here representing the city of Brno, and I'm really glad that everything works fine, and I hope that you will like our video, animated video that will somehow reflect what we've done in the Brno metropolitan area in a really animated way. It's in Czech, but I hope that you will see the subtitles and I'm happy to then read about your feedback in the chat. So maybe we can start the video.
Tahle nenápadná, ale důležitá tečka uprostřed Evropy je Brno a žádný z jeho přibližně 400 000 obyvatel nežije izolovaný život. To stejné by přitom mohlo říct i dalšího 250 000 lidí žijících ve skoro 200 vesnicích a městech v jeho bezprostředním okolí. Všichni denně cestujeme, ať už za prací, do školy nebo za zábavou. Naše životy jsou čím dál tím propojenější a navzájem se ovlivňují. Smysluplný rozvoj takového území bez intenzivní spolupráce zkrátka není možný. Katastr není zeď a doba, kdy stačilo uvažovat v jeho hranicích, je dávno pryč. Proto jsou od roku 2013 kroky Brna a obcí v jeho zázemí koordinovány společnou strategií brněnské metropolitní oblasti. Díky tomu mohou společně plánovat důležité projekty a získávat na ně peníze z Evropské unie prostřednictvím nástroje integrovaných teritoriálních investic. A jaký to má reálný dopad? Ku příkladu cyklostezky začínají navazovat a někam po nich dojedete. Celý region je dopravně dostupný, zvenčí i uvnitř, autem i hromadnou dopravou. Naše děti nemusí za kvalitním vzděláním putovat přes hory a doly a třeba mezi nimi odhalíme dalšího Mendla. Máme tu čisto, zeleno a nemusíme se bát nadechnout z plných plic. Vážíme si krajiny a proto stavíme rozumně a systematicky. Zastavujeme nevyužité plochy ve městech a místo montoven nám v kraji rostou vědecká i kreativní centra a kluby pro seniory. A co dál? Právě teď společně připravujeme strategii pro budoucnost. A ptáme se i těch nejdůležitějších, samotných obyvatel metropolitní oblasti. Pokud se chceš dozvědět více o tom, jak se BMO rozvíjí, podívej se na web metropolitní.brno.cz. Zapoj se i ty a jednej metropolitně.
Okay. I think that the video was maybe a bit slower, but I will add the link to video in our chat later after I finish my presentation, and I hope that you can maybe watch it again and it will have probably the better connection. So maybe we can share my presentation, please. Okay, great. I'm going to talk and I'm going to reflect our metropolitan cooperation in the Brno metropolitan area. As you can see in the video, you've seen what we've achieved so far, but and you can also read about that in the Sustainable Urban Handbook, as Charlotte already told you. So right now I will much more talk about the future and what about the fact what we are expecting to do in the future in with our metropolitan cooperation. But you can we please move to another slide? Let's start in the beginning. I hope that you've already heard about the Integrated Territorial Investment Tool. It's an acronym ITI. I will talk about ITI a lot, so maybe at the beginning I will just explain it what it is. It's basically an urban tool for the development of the functional urban area, like as we get it here in the Czech Republic and as we use it here in the Czech Republic. And ITI, this instrument that was somehow promoted by the European Commission, represents a steering point for our metropolitan cooperation here in the city of Brno and the Brno metropolitan area, because we've really pushed our national level, the Ministry for Regional Development, to somehow incorporate the fact that we need to, as a big city, we need to cooperate with the municipalities that surround us. We need to have some kind of formal instrument to do that, to have a power from national ministry to have a input for the cooperation as such. So there was pressure from local level on national level, but also from the European level through the ITI tool, and this helped us to create a Brno metropolitan area and metropolitan cooperation within our area as such. Can we please move to another slide? So you've already seen the video that was describing the strategy for this programming period, but we are moving forward, and this chart can maybe reflect what will be new. So as we needed to implement the ITI, we needed to create a strategy, we needed to delimit the functional urban area, and then we could promote our strategic projects, fund our strategic projects. But this strategy was only just starting point for the cooperation, because we need to move forward. We need to really establish much more wider cooperation that won't be just accessible through the ITI instrument. So we are creating another strategy for the next programming period, and this strategy will not be only strictly interventionist, so it won't only focus on European funded topics. It will has much more bigger impact. We have also new delimitation of our territory. It's one delimitation done by the ministry of regional development. So now we are composed of 184 municipalities. I hope, well, it's a lot. I will explain you how we are trying to manage it as such, but this is the area that we are working with. So as such, we are creating, and we want to create some kind of metropolitan system in the Brno metropolitan area, and we focus on another additional activities. Like we are trying to analyze our territory thanks to the metropolitan indicator system, and we want to trying to promote the idea of having a metropolitan area. Next slide, please. And this, as I get it, it's some kind of metropolitan thinking that we are discovering here in the Brno metropolitan area. In terms of material, so we are trying to focus on the big metropolitan issues in terms of transport, in terms of environment, but also cultural metropolitan thinking. So we are building mutual awareness about cooperation, building mutual awareness about trusting each other as such. And maybe for the future, a bit of institutionalized metropolitan thinking, but I will talk about that later. And here on that slide, you can also see the feedback from mayors. We've asked our mayors, it's 184 mayors, about the feedback, how they see the future of our metropolitan cooperation in the Brno metropolitan area. And you can see here that the external financial resources, like it's an ITI tool, isn't a priority. The priority is the ability to have a consensus on the area, to compromise, and to somehow have a balanced representation of the area as such. Can we please move to another slide? As we describe it, we creating an integrated approach. So we can somehow say that we are trying to create integrated solutions, integrated projects that has a much more bigger value than individual projects, and it does not create duplicities. It's trying to integrate the territory. So this is our work for this and this and the next programming period as such. Can we move to another slide, please? Okay, and as we've been asked to make this presentation much more interactive, we were, and my colleagues, we are mainly thinking about the future, about the future development of metropolitan cooperation within the functional urban area in the Czech Republic, because this is for us here in the middle Europe, something very, very new. And I would say that we are pioneering the idea to cooperate in a metropolitan way. So, but we are also know that this the idea to help us to do so. But we need to also be very realistic in terms that maybe that in the future there won't be no ITI. So we need to also create some maybe a bit much more formal ways how to cooperate. We and my colleagues, we are having an idea of creating some kind of metropolitan agency. I think that as we've already visited a lot of URBACT and ESPON seminars, so we know that this is something very well known in the Western Europe, but here in the Czech Republic, and I would say in a bit of Eastern Europe, that's very something new to cooperate on different metropolitan level. So we are thinking of creating an apolitical expert agency that would implement a specific agenda and that would provide some services for mayors, such as counseling or some kind of methodical assistance with project management and etc. And we would like to create with that agency some projects that would promote the territory and would be supported across the territory as such. This is very huge problem right now that we don't have, it's very difficult to create huge projects that has an agglomeration impact. And we were thinking about the possibility that this agency should be financed by municipalities. So this is an idea that we are putting on the table here during our discussion, that's something what we are, and my colleagues, we are trying to reflect about the future here in Brno and metropolitan area. And we are asking you whether you think that this is the right next step, or what are your inputs? What do you think we should do more? Because right now our cooperation is very informal. There are no formal structure. We have a steering committee that is like a bit of political body. Then we have expert groups for thematic topics, like expert groups for environment, expert groups in transport, etc., etc. And we are trying to really involve all the stakeholders. But as you could see, like to involve 184 mayors is a bit difficult. So we are trying boost the idea of having the metropolitan agency. So my question for you is whether you think it's the right step. Okay.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much for that presentation. I certainly am impressed at the idea of working with 184 municipalities. That's quite something. And I think your experience is really useful for lots of other cities to hear about. I know you have a lot more detail that you could talk about. We've made our presenters talk in 10 minutes only, which is years of experience in 10 minutes is pretty hard to do. So thank you for that, and thank you for the animation. We have some questions in the chat for you already, so maybe we'll focus on those in a minute. But first of all, I'm going to bring in our rapporteur to reflect on those first questions. I think Sonia's provocation is a good one, and perhaps people can put in the chat, is Metropolitan Agency the right next step? Let's see what people think about that. I like the fact that you're provoking us to think about that. But first of all, I'm going to ask Ivan Tosic, who was partly involved in this chapter in the JRC Handbook and has a lot of experience, to come in and basically give some reflections on what Carlotta has said, the results of the polls, and what Sonia has presented from Brno. So some brief reflections from you first, Ivan. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. Thanks to involve me into this discussion. I think that this handbook is very good to give help to cities and everyone who is interested in urban issues, because it gives a kind of critical overview about not only about results but also about problems, potential problems in the different territorial levels. In my opinion, ITI was one of the most innovative step of the Commission in the last decade. It became possible since 2014 to work on this territorial level, and Brno was one of the really good examples. Interestingly enough, it was some of the Central East European countries which really took this tool. Poland, Czech Republic, I think even Romania implemented this tool. So in this regard, the Eastern European countries were a bit more innovative than the Western European counterparts. This cross-border work is very, very important, because you can even link to each other different sectors. There are good examples in Europe where coordinated transport policies help coordinated housing policies, because affordable housing can also be created outside the city borders where transport links are good. So it is a really good example for bringing together different economic and also social aspects. After 2020, the share of ITI the share of the possibility of functional area work will be increased from 6 to 8%. This is a sign that also the Commission really accepts this view. I think for the future, it is very important that the well-functioning functional areas should get a higher role in cohesion policy, and especially in the recovery and resilience facility, which is now debated on national level, and decisions will be taken next spring. I think it would be very important to allow functional urban areas which have an institution to be beneficiaries of recovery and resilience money. And this comes back to the last question of Sonia. Yes, I think that it is very important to have an agency which is independently working for the sake of the whole metropolitan area. But at least it is as important to have a political board on the level of the metropolitan area. These boards are usually containing all the mayors of an area, but if it is not possible to have 184 mayors, then you can create some smaller groups and then each of them represented by one mayor. But you have to have a board which is institutionalized. You can say that this board can make decisions, this is accepted by all the settlements, and then you can say that we are prepared to play a role in the recovery and resilience facility. Please give us directly money to this functional urban area level instead of to the smaller municipalities. So I would like to say that the agency is important, but also to institutionalize the political level.
Thanks, Ivan. Comprehensive answer there. Ivan, could you tilt your camera a little so we can see you better? That's great. Thank you. Great. Thank you for those reactions and reflections to that first input from Sonia in particular. I'm going to see if Ed has any questions to bring in before we take a break. So Ed, anything coming in on the chat bar that is a useful question to feed in at this point?
Yeah, the chat bar is coming alive, which is great. So a couple of questions for Sonia actually before we break. One of them from Zdenka Simonovic, who's one of our speakers actually in the first webinar. I'll just tell you the two questions, Sonia, and then you can reflect back on both of them. The first one's about what Ivan picked up on, which is this notion of the apolitical metropolitan agency. The question is, have you tested this idea out with any of the mayors? What's the view from some of the politicians? So I can see you smiling. So while you're thinking about the answer to that one, let me just ping the other one across to you. The other one is about the kind of process, the kind of way in which you went about defining the sort of the territorial area in this current programming period. Will you be building on that and doing things the same way? Or will you make some key changes looking ahead? I know you're having this conversation about how things will work in the next program period. So those are the two questions just now. One about the political views on the structure, and the other about whether it's business as usual or whether you're going to change things a bit in the next programming period. Okay, thanks, Sonia.
Okay, so firstly I will answer the question about if we check the idea of an apolitical agency with the mayors. Yes, we did. As I already said in the presentation, we did some kind of survey between our mayors, and there was one question that asked them whether they would be in favor of having some kind of metropolitan agency that would help them with their project management and etc. and other processes. And most like 50% of mayors, they agreed with the fact of having this kind of body, but it's just like 50%. But we can count that it's it's a beginning of our process of having the agency. But then we after this question we had another question whether they would agree to support this agency like financially, and these results weren't that satisfactory. to be honest, but still we are at the beginning of our process, so let's hope that we can persuade much more mayors to do so. Like the mayors of the really big municipalities within the territory, they are in favor of it, but for example some very mayors of very small municipalities that has like 500 inhabitants, because in Czech Republic we do have these municipalities. They are not that in favor. They're really maybe scared that they will be eaten by the big Brno. So this is the mindset that we need to change. So we've asked them, and we have an answer. And the next question, it was about about the strategy, how it will be different. Yes, this strategy will be much more focused on projects. So in our strategy, there will be we have 3 types of projects, and these projects need to be written in the strategy in order to get support. And as we will use ITI in the next programming period as well, we are right now we are cooperating with the ministry about the funds, about the money that we will get from the ministries, but we will also use we will look for another sources, another EU funding, like React EU funds, etc., etc. So it will be much more, how to say it, like a diverse strategy, much more multi-funded strategy. And this creates another another work for us that we need to build on. But we are excited, and we are looking forward to do so. But with the COVID, the whole participatory process of the strategy is a bit slower. But we will have another working groups with 30 people, and we will hopefully to manage it somehow.
Thanks so much, Sonia, for being honest in your answers there about the process that you're going through in Brno. We know that participation takes time, and that will be the focus of the next webinar, partly the one on governance. But thank you so much. We do have some other questions coming in the chat, but I'm going to hold those until the final session, especially questions directed at the European Commission about the future. We've seen those questions. We're going to pick them up in the next session. Please keep putting your comments and questions in the chat. This is really helpful for us to know how we can help you, what your specific questions are, what you see as the challenges for territorial focus. So that's the first session. Thank you so much again, Sonia. That was fantastic input from you. We're going to take a short break. We think this is good practice on digital meetings to take a short break. We're going to take a 5-minute break to stretch, have a comfort break, get yourself a coffee. We're going to start promptly at, at 8 minutes past 11. Central European time. So just take a quick break, and we'll be back soon with the next part of this webinar. Thanks.
Welcome back to Learning from Practice Part 2. If you want to continue to put questions in the chat, please do. We're getting some good comments and questions there. Could you just make sure that when you post a question in the chat, you post it to everyone, not just to the panelists? So you'll see there's a bar that says to. Just click all attendees or everyone, so that everybody can see your comments in the chat. That would be great. We're going to have 2 more inputs from cities now, first from Łódź in Poland, then from Murcia in Spain. So I'm very happy to introduce Joanna Brzezinska, who is Deputy Director of the Revitalization and Housing Department in Łódź, and she's going to talk to us about an area-based approach to regeneration. Over to you, Joanna.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm sharing my screen now, and I hope you see it. So my name is Joanna, and I work for the municipality of Łódź, Poland, for Revitalization and Housing Bureau. And today I would like to share with you some of our experience from revitalization process, in which we apply a area-based approach and people-based approach. Since revitalization, in other words, urban regeneration, is a process that takes optimal advantage of local conditions, strengthens local potentials, and is primarily carried out in collaboration with local community for its benefit. So, in which everything started in 2015 and 2016, when we developed a strategic document on the basis of a National Act on Revitalization that is Municipal Revitalization Program. And in line with the SAD Act, based on statistical data, we looked for concentration of negative phenomena in 5 dimensions, starting with the social sphere, because this is the most important one. We assess statistics on poverty, crime, unemployment, social benefits, use to name but a few. Then we looked for negative trends in economic, environmental, spatial, functional, and material spheres, and concentration of more than 40 indicators in all of these spheres allowed us to delimitate a degraded area. So we mapped all the data by address using a cluster method in order to determine precisely the location of each and every phenomenon. This map is an example of such a spatial mapping and illustrates one of the problems of in the social sphere. And as you can see, the darker the color of the hexagon, the greater the intensity occurrence of a given phenomenon. And results of our diagnosis revealed basically that the majority of problems that we assessed in all of these spheres are observed in the historic city center, as is illustrated and can be spotted on this example. So that is how we determined, firstly, a degraded area, and secondly, a revitalization area. And in case of which they both cover the same territory of 1,783 hectares, which is populated by almost 23% of which residents. And this is generally where numerous hard and soft measures are being implemented to fulfill the main goal of our program, which is to transform the heart of my hometown into an attractive place to live, to work, and to spend free time. And I use the word heart here deliberately, as the revitalization area covers the whole central part of which you can see it on the map in yellow, while the blue line marks the official greater urban zone. At this point, I should add that population-wise, Łódź is the 3rd biggest city in Poland, while in terms of our housing stock, we are the biggest landlord in the country. Despite some privatization efforts in the past decade, there are still around 43,000 communal flats owned by municipality, and a great deal of them is located in historic, old, listed townhouses from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Still, many of them are not connected to central heating or municipal water or sewage systems. Hence, these are often not the highbrow neighborhoods where people wish to live. In order to prevent this trend, in 2016, we started a complex and comprehensive process of revitalization, including retrofitting of tens of these townhouses. And we couldn't intervene everywhere at one time, obviously. So we first focused at 8 priority areas. You can see on the map marked with numbers. And in 2016, we applied for support from ERDF, from Regional Operational Program for Lotsk region, and were granted a sum of almost 220 million euros for those 8 priority area projects. Within the framework of these projects, we will be able to renovate as many as 178 buildings, offering our residents 928 quality flats. But there will be also 119 new offices to let, or 38 studios dedicated to artists. And although lion's share of these measures are hard and address problems in the spatial, material and technical spheres, there are also ones aiming at greening public spaces, like park renovations. We have 3 of them, but also planting more than 1,700 trees. But there are also new social functions and new social services to be introduced. such as training flats for former foster care pupils, professional activation centres, local activity support centres, neighbourhood clubs, arts and crafts centres, to name but a few. What is worth mentioning is that some of our revitalisation projects, which are in line with the development strategy of which metropolitan area, are financed through an ITI instrument from the ERDF, like 4 out of 8 aforementioned projects, but also, as an example, could be this beautiful historic palace, the Steinland family mansion, one of the most precious and run-down landmarks on the main street of Łódź. And thanks to an integrated intervention, it begins a new chapter in its history. This building complex that once belonged to a factory family shows an evolution of such textile manufacturers, from common weavers to owners of fabulous fortunes. Now it will serve a completely new purpose. The basement and ground floor, as well as first floor, will be dedicated for restaurant, and the office and conference spaces are planned for the second floor, while the attic will house 8 hotel or hostel rooms. To support residents who are affected by the process of revitalization, we developed and implemented numerous solutions. And first and foremost, in order to carry out urban regeneration on such a large scale, we had to plan and organize relocation of almost 1,000 families to another flat for the time of retrofitting. And to facilitate this process, we hired people who became unordinary, extraordinary city officers, not working from behind a desk. They serve as kind of liaisons between the municipality and the residents, and we call them area hosts and social light housekeepers. Area hosts are the ones who are responsible for providing up-to-date information on planned revitalization activities and foreseeing relocation schedules of residents, while light housekeepers are the ones who help residents directly in the process of relocation and provide a comprehensive support in solving daily problems. For example, help in settlement their rent arrears and their communication with debt collection department, and encourage them to join debt arrangement schemes or collect and transport their food parcels. So together as kind of mediators, they have managed to improve communication between the city administration and inhabitants and build trust in the city's activities. And building up on this good practice, Łódź joined an urban transfer network project called Urban Regeneration Mix. I have the pleasure to coordinate, in which not only we share what we have learned through our mediators' work, but also draw from experience of other 6 European cities who also apply a people-based and area-based approach in their urban regeneration activities. In the beginning of the project, we set up an urban local group, which serves as a forum for people living in one neighborhood on a revitalization area. And this group is formed by city officers, and there's also an area host and a light housekeeper. But most of all, there are residents, local activists, representatives of NGOs, local schools or churches, who prior to establishing this ULG often didn't know each other. And we meet on a regular basis, and our role here is to be community connectors and animators, as we want to bring these people together and initiate joint actions for the benefit of their community. We help such a local community to apply for a micro grant to repaint and beautify a yard of their townhouse, because you should know that most of the townhouse in Łódź have a yard in the back of a front building, and more often than not they are dull, dirty and not very pleasant, but this is where the majority of social life takes place, and this is where children spend their free time after school, so it's important for them. So This is an example of what we do on a micro scale to improve the quality of life in Łódź and to empower our citizens. But this is not all what we do. And to give you very quickly a bigger picture of our sub-measures, I can say that in cooperation with NGOs, mostly local, we carry out 104 projects as of August 2020. These are partnership projects co-financed from the ESF to promote education on every level, social inclusion via counseling, training, flats, and paid employment, and entrepreneurship through trainings, tutoring, or seed capital for startups. And all this to fulfill the goals of a municipal revitalization program, but most of all, to make my hometown a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanna, for that great presentation and really beautiful images of what you're doing in Łódź, which really help us to understand, I think, how that revitalization process is succeeding in the center of the city. I also thought that case was really interesting in terms of integration, the way that you're integrating different types of investments and integrating across different stakeholders. And we just want to plug, we have a whole webinar coming up on integration on the 17th of November. And it shows how these building blocks for sustainable urban development are not disconnected from each other. So Joanna's just been talking to us about territorial focus, but in fact, a lot of the way of working involves a cross-sectoral integrated approach. So thank you so much, Joanna. We've maybe got some questions for you coming up in the chat later. And I also wanted to point out that Joanna also has a fantastic film which shows the experience of one of the residents in that area and how this process had transformed their life. We don't have time to show the film today, unfortunately, but we can put a link to that in the chat, and it will be on the Urban Development Network platform when we post all of the presentations from this webinar. So thanks so much, Joanna, for bringing that to life for us. And I'm now going to hand over to our third speaker for the learning from practice element. And this is Casper van Hout. Casper, if you want to start sharing your screen, that would be great. Casper is the European projects expert from the city of Murcia in Spain. And he's going to talk about this third element that Carlotta talked about, the third sort of lesson or case to be thought about, which is about urban-rural links. Over to you, Casper.
Thank you very much, Sally. Just a quick introduction to the city of Murcia. We've got a very extensive territory, which means that with almost 500,000 inhabitants, we have a very dispersed territorial composition. As you can see in the third image, the red part is the city center and the green part is where 62% of our population lives. Why is territorial cohesion so important for us at a local scale? Because of our population, obviously, but also because of their access to municipal services, transport, education, and everything citizens need in a general sense, not just the people that live in the city centre. In our Sustainable Integrated Urban Development Strategy, which was awarded in the year 2016-17 with 17.6 million euros of ERDF funded projects, the Urban Development Strategy did not finance specific things within the scope of the urban-rural link as we know it in the city. But nevertheless, things like transport were very much present in the strategy. One of the things Murcia has been very big on for the last half a decade is the integration of all strategies, projects and programs to have this one big cohesive city strategy. Instead of working in clusters, we work as a whole. Our strategy had a very extensive citizen participation process, both on and offline. Now in the year 2020, with the COVID crisis, everybody's doing everything online, but I can tell you that back in the year 2016, that was not how it worked. We did involve the Murcia City Social Council, which is a special council that interacts directly with the mayor and is composed of all different sectors of society, be it professional colleges, be it the professional sectors, be it collectives, for example, disabilities, sports, stuff like that. They had individual interviews with each of the members, and then we had thematic working groups that worked on the different areas in which we divided our urban development strategy. One of the projects I want to highlight, because it's very much a good example of the urban-rural link, was that we recovered Murcia River, which is the Segura River that was once known as one of the filthiest rivers in Spain. Over the time, it's been recovered in the sense that it's not polluted anymore. But now we take it one step further and we revitalize the entire river course when it enters the city till it exits the city for leisure activities and for public use. We adapted part of the environment to recover both the indigenous flora as the fauna, making a versatile and accessible area for the population. The river cuts through the city. We wanted to make it a place that united the north and south part of Murcia, and a place where people could interact and spend their leisure time either with sports, either with activities on and in the river or in the surrounding areas. And as you can see in the image, the river project goes straight into the countryside. So where you can see the motorway, there are two big passages where the river area connects directly to the countryside, and we are revitalizing those links. And how are we doing this? Well, as I said, the rural part was not financed by the urban development strategy, but the city does have its own projects that are working towards revitalizing the entire area from where the river comes into our region. Very important, the citizen participation process had the operation selection was done by using the participation process from an URBAC project which we developed, which is called Urban DNA. And in this case, it was Urban DNA Connects, because we were talking about connecting the city with the surrounding districts that are more rural in their workings, which was the thematic objective 9 of the Article 7 ERDF funding for the period 14-20. Here you can see some examples. You can see the entire area highlighted. It also included, for example, car parks, as you can see. And on the left, you have the two digital renders of what it was supposed to look like. And on the right, you can see it actually turned out pretty close to what the intended result would be. In this case, I would even say spot on. And as you can see in the center, there's the city center, and this is the entire rural area, which has been linked through cycle paths, greenways. There are many routes available for citizens and for tourism alike to enjoy the peripheral parts of the city. Also, which is a very important item for us, is the fact that trying to use less contaminating modes of transport, which in this case, by interlinking all those more rural districts to the city center via greenways that people don't necessarily have to use roads for vehicle traffic. They can either walk, cycle, or use electrical vehicles. Which brings me to another important aspect of what we're doing in the urban-rural link, which is we're obviously signatories of the Covenant of Mayors, and we are implementing the Green Deal. At a local dimension, this means projects focused on farm-to-table, 0 kilometer produce, of which the philosophy is to reduce to the max all the contamination it would provoke, especially seeing that Murcia is it's like the orchard of Spain and even of Europe from dating back from Roman times, which means that we have still a very high weight of agriculture in our regional economy. And culture, which brings me to culture, meaning that we also use culture to get this urban-rural integration, these peri-urban areas, to get them linked to the city. How are we doing this? Well, by using a new cultural model. This cultural model depends on all municipal installations, both in the city centre as in the rural areas, and by creating districts and specialist routes that connect those districts and that connect those centres, we're trying to get culture out of the city centre and into the peripheral areas. By doing so, if citizens want to consume culture in that sense, they have to displace themselves. So it is very possible that there are exhibitions, that there are performances, that there are specific items that will not be available in the city centre per se, which means that we were trying to not only get people from the surrounding areas to come to the city centre for specific items, but also that people from the city centre go and get to know the surrounding area. We have a local model with EU pilots, because Murcia is a member of the Urban Agenda for the EU Partnership on Culture and Cultural Heritage, where we've proposed various actions that can be carried out by local and regional governments. And one of the, or a few of the examples you can see here, cultural street invasion, which is bring culture to citizens. We have creative hubs to make sure that artistic production can take place in almost any area. And cultural reactives, which is very special in these times of COVID crisis. We're trying to do is reactivate the culture sector, as our mayor said, which is an essential part of our city. What does it mean for us? It means that we have a more territorial cohesion, that we have we reinforce both the local identity and the European identity. And when I say local identity, I don't only mean as people from Murcia, but also as people from specific districts and neighbourhoods. We are very much working on giving back the maybe traditional or even reinvented identities to subgroups of the city. Also putting into value the historical heritage that they have present, and obviously it's a very good tool also for social integration. Now, the two projects you can see is the artillery barracks, which has 5,400 square meters of cultural center where we will be implementing the Chime Hub, and the Murcia Regional Prison, which is in the capital, obviously. It's a very old building. It's been abandoned for a long time, and using these ERDF funds will be recovered and will be turned also into a cultural and artistical center. There's also the Connection South, which is another good example of integration, and seeing it is focused on transport. It is very important, not for the city centre, but for the entire municipality. We are using the same citizen participation program we obtained from that URBAC project, and we're using ERDF funds from thematic objective 7 dedicated to big infrastructures. We will have a new train station that will be receiving the trains under that in a fairly densely populated area of the city. We will have many square meters of area that will be destined to parks and gardens, to culture, and to the citizens, which directly connects also as a interconnectional hub for other forms of transport, buses, taxis, bicycles, electrical vehicles, etc. What does this tell us for the future? Well, the areas of the urban-rural links have to pass, obviously, as do most European items, through the economic prosperity and employment, the equality and integration, environmental protection and sustainability, and governance and citizen participation. Now, what are we using for that at a local level? Well, we're using the urban agenda, mostly as a pilot project for the implementation of the local urban agenda from the Spanish Ministry of Development with 2 other cities in Spain. We're using ERDF and agricultural funds, and we're, as I mentioned before, using the cohesion of local strategies to make sure that, as they say, all noses are pointing in the right direction, in the same direction, and we're seeing the territory as a whole. So we don't perceive a city centre anymore, we perceive an entire municipality and how that should be interlinked to give the best service we can to our citizens. The lessons we learned regarding citizens: inform, engage, and co-govern. We have ample tools at our disposable for us to engage citizens at a direct level. For funding, synergy, again, convergence and fast foresight. What's going to come? We are very much on top of what the European Union is going to do in the next financing period. And at EU level, sorry for the repetition, urban agenda, which is what everything's directed at, integration and collaboration, the spillover effect between urban, peri-urban and rural, and obviously employment, which I think for most of Europe now is the main factor. Thank you very much, and I think I exceeded my time by 2 minutes. Sorry about that.
You're good, Casper. That was well worth it. Thank you so much with those slides around all the different ways in which you're looking at territorial focus. So I think that was really interesting to see the ways in which you're connecting different parts of the city through food, through agricultural production, through mobility, through culture. So again, a really integrated and quite a complex approach there. I really thought that was great. I loved the term cultural street invasion. And I think that's something we miss this year, that COVID has made impossible. And I think it's also maybe a way that we look at recovering the cultural industries in the future by those kind of activities where we bring people outside and to connect them to different parts of their own city through dispersing cultural activities. So that was really rich. Thank you so much, Casper, for that presentation. I'm going to give the floor now again to the rapporteur, Ivan, for a few minutes to reflect on what Joanna and Casper have brought to the table here. Then please feel free to still talk in the chat. I'm going to ask Ed to also bring back in from the chat what we have there. So over to you first, Ivan.
Thank you very much. I think we have seen 2 very interesting examples. If I can make a few remarks on the neighborhood revitalization of Łódź. First of all, I call the attention to the importance of mapping, which was very well shown in the case of Łódź, to find out where the problems concentrate. And if you want to know more about mapping, you can go to the Urbex Remaking the City web tool, where we have other also very interesting examples how mapping can be done in such cases. The area hosts and lighthouse keepers are really innovative solutions which were developed by Łódź and are now well known on European level as good practices. And it is also very important that Łódź took the decision to lead a transfer network, because if you achieve something, then you can really transfer your good examples, and other cities are now also learning what Łódź achieved and whether they can do something similar, how they can adapt this good example. There is one question which not question, but one important issue to raise, that in such models, such urban renewal models, you have to be very careful about gentrification effects, because I can imagine that if 1,000 flats are totally renovated in the city center of Łódź, then many people are interested to get these flats. So it is a big task for a city to avoid gentrification and allow also middle class and lower middle class people to access these flats. And the final remark, that this project is an excellent example for the future Renovate flagship for the resilience and recovery facility. many such projects have to be prepared by European cities to be able to spend a lot of money, which is coming up next year as part of this extraordinary resilience and recovery fund. Now, a few words about the urban-rural case. I think we really have to forget about rural as in original meaning. Except for deep rural places, everyone is looking on the same television channels. Everyone is really going to territorial shopping centers, etc. So it's very good if you create better urban-rural linkages. I liked very much the river as one example, one tool to connect urban to rural. Also the active transport modes like bike lanes, etc. But also the cultural projects. And you can also discover heritage projects in rural areas, and you can connect them to the city brochure, and then you create a link between urban and rural. I think the COVID pandemic shows the importance of urban-rural linkages. Proximity food has been discovered in many of our cities because this is available, much more available than food coming from thousands of kilometers away. But also the joint decisions about keeping recreational areas open is a very important issue. And unfortunately here I know a lot of negative examples where rural areas which were not connected well to the city in thinking and decision-making just closed down their areas not to allow urban residents to come to them and bring over the virus, what they consider as a danger. So in fact, urban-rural linkages are very important. And in my opinion, in an optimal case, they could develop into functional urban areas later. So the functional urban area institutions could be considered as a framework for urban-rural linkages. But you can also think about non-territorial links. So there are examples in Europe, not too many, where an urban center is connected to rural areas which are not nearby, but the food, etc., is coming from there. So there are plenty of opportunities to develop urban-rural linkages. These were my remarks. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ivan. I think they're really useful remarks, especially thinking about the future, the current circumstances that we're in, that COVID has altered our circumstances, but there are some opportunities that the way in which we have lived and worked and traveled this year might help us to think better in future. Food is a good example of that. Culture on hold for now, and how these cases can inspire us to think about how to do these linked to cohesion funds and recovery funds in future. So thanks a lot. Stay on board, Ivan, because there might be more questions coming your way. But also I'm going to now hand over to Ed to see if we have any questions in the chat that we think would be good to feed in at this point before we move over to talking about the future with the European Commission. Ed.
Thanks a lot, Sally, and thanks, Ivan, for that really helpful summary. I guess a couple of things, Sally. So we've got a question from Miran Estensoro about the going back to the Brno story about what technical capabilities are helpful in terms of pulling all this together. So maybe that's something we can sort of address separately. Maybe Sonia can pick that up separately. We've also got a specific question about the involvement of the private sector from Terry Stavropoulos. We might pick that up in our webinar 5, actually, where we're going to be looking at finance and financial models, because I know that's one of the themes we'll be picking up there. For now, maybe a question for Joanna, and then probably a question for Peter from the Commission, who will be joining us shortly. So maybe the question for Joanna first, Sally, and that's about whether this neighbourhood approach has helped to integrate ESIF funds, because we know the difficulty sometimes of, packaging ERDF and ESF and other sources together. Whether the work you've done in Łódź has made that easier for you, Joanna. So maybe we'll take that question first, and then I'll come back with the question for Peter, Sally, if that's okay.
Sure, Joanna, could you answer that, do you think?
Of course. In brief, I answered it also in the chat bar for those who are not able to listen to me now. But generally, I would say a big yes, that it helped us to integrate funds both from ERDF and ESF. But that was the logic of our action in the revitalization project. That's how we actually planned it. Because physical intervention that takes place in the city centre is always followed by introducing a new social function in a given neighbourhood. based on the needs that we assessed in this neighborhood. So to give example, there are several local city centers planned here and there, and depending on what kind of residents live there. For example, we have a neighborhood where we see that there is more elderly people. So we decided to dedicate, to profile such a center for seniors. Whereas in a different place, knowing that there are, let's say, more than an average schools and preschools, we decided to arrange a youth club. So the activities that will be introduced within these centers, thanks to ESF funds, in one of the many partnership projects that we run with our NGOs, will be dedicated to support and supplement these social functions introduced here and there within the revitalization, priority revitalization area. So I would say yes. I mean, everything is planned.
Thanks, Joanna. So the short answer is yes, but you've given us a bit of example. So integrating ESF funds was easier in the process that you had when you had the neighbourhood focus. That's great. Ed, any more?
Yeah, and the final question, Sally, which links into Peter, who's joining us now, is I guess a couple of things. One is from Philippe Farhart, a question about the fit between the kind of ITI approach and the 2030 goals, and that also links to Brno. But Peter might want to pick that up in his future reflections, because the other question is which comes from Gwendolyn Carpenter. Gwendolyn will be joining us in webinar 5, which is just about the Commission's position on ITIs for the next programming period, and the extent to which the Commission sees this experimental phase, and as we come to the end of this first programming period where we've used ITIs, whether that's seen as a positive experience. So I guess, has it been a positive experience, and what's the position going forward on ITIs, Sally? Those are the questions to pick up with Peter, and I think we've addressed all of the others in the chat bar. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ed. So that's a nice segue into the next and almost final part of the webinar, which is a conversation now with Peter Takac from the European Commission, DG Regional and Urban Policy, thinking a bit more about the future. So Peter, if you could put your camera on and be ready. I just wanted to pick up one other question that I saw in the chat from Philippe about the 2030 agenda goals. Just to let you know that in the last webinar on monitoring on the 25th of November, we'll actually have a presentation on how to localize the Sustainable Development Goals from the City of Bonn. So if you're interested in that whole process of what this means for other development goal agendas, please join us for that webinar. But now we're going to come to Peter. There's already a couple of questions there for Peter about maybe first, Peter, the experience of ITIs during this programming period, and what does that mean for the future? Could you maybe give us your view on that?
Yes, thank you, Sally. Certainly. Hello, everyone. On the role of the ITIs, indeed, the ITI tool will remain in the next programming period as one of the territorial instruments to support sustainable urban development. And the other territorial tools, for example, the community-led local development or similar national instrument, can also support sustainable urban development. But ITI, as 1420 experience shows, it can be very successful in terms of facilitating the process to have a more strategic and collaborative approach to urban development. And I think this is where the success really depends on that there is a good strategy for the functional urban area, there is collaborative governance in place, and if these framework conditions are ensured, then we see a more successful implementation of the ITI tool. I think we have perhaps less emphasis for the future period on the tools themselves than these framework conditions. But the ITI tool is still, I think, a very good tool to foster, for example, cooperation in functional areas. And I think this is where one of the key area lies for ITI in the next programming period.
Thanks. That's clear. You see that tool going forward, and it's actually the framework conditions that are the most important in the strategy, which we covered in the first building block webinar. So Peter, if you could tell us, from what you've heard today, these conversations about territorial focus applied in different ways, what do you think is important to build on for the future?
Certainly what is key, as I said, are the framework conditions. So to ensure that that the actors are working together to identify the challenges, the needs, and they are able to come up with joint solution for their city or urban area, and this need to tackle complex challenges, and the functional urban area approach can bring also multiple municipalities together to address their challenges, as we could see with the example of Brno. While there are also cases where we need to tackle complex challenges in our cities, which can be concentrated in a specific area. So I think the Lodz example showed it very well how these target areas can be identified through a very evidence-based mapping exercise, and how it can be tackled in a targeted effort. And the takeaway message from Murcia for me is that urban-rural linkages can be addressed at many different levels. It has a very strategic angle to put a specific emphasis on urban-rural linkages for the entire urban area, but it also has a very targeted and specific intervention to the river side, which is really a very local intervention, but it has a wide effect to the surrounding rural area as well. So I think these are really good examples to show us how the different spatial scales can come into an effect to sustainable urban development. And I'm very glad to hear these examples today, because all of them are very relevant when preparing for the future and thinking what could be improved in the next for the next programming period.
Thanks, Peter, and I agree. I think they've been really inspiring cases, very rich, and obviously there's a lot more information related to each of them, which we will post on the JRC and UDN websites. Peter, can you tell us, do you foresee in the next programme period, will there be changes in relation to sustainable urban development and this territorial focus? Do you see anything changing that we should be aware of?
Yes, there are certain changes that point towards a more harmonized framework for integrated territorial and urban development. First, there is a new cross-cutting policy objective, Europe Closer to Citizen, for integrated territorial and urban development. And also, as part of this harmonized framework, now, for the first time, there are key requirements defined at EU level for the integrated and multi-stakeholder approach that needs to be in place for all territorial instruments supporting urban strategies. One key requirement is to have integrated territorial or local development strategies in place that apply a very strong integrated and participatory approach. The second part of the requirements are that the governance framework and the implementation mechanism need to ensure the involvement of the relevant urban authorities and bodies and also the local stakeholders in the process of implementing EU funds for sustainable urban development. What has not changed are the possibility to use ITI for sustainable urban development. What is a novelty that now the CLLD in urban areas is also recognized as one of the tools for sustainable urban development. And also similar national tools to ITI and CLLD can be used by member states if they have more tradition to support sustainable urban development strategies in their local governance structure. Because what has not changed as well for the future, that there will be a specific earmarked allocation under the Regional Development Fund to Sustainable Urban Development, and in line with the requirements to the territorial instruments, sustainable urban development strategies targeting urban areas are a key condition to spend ERDF allocation to sustainable urban development. What is a technicality, but very important, I think, for this webinar session is that as urban strategies can operate at any territorial level as far as they are urban areas, they can target functional areas, they can be more concentrated on neighborhoods, but in the monitoring system now, we will be able to see if the programs are targeting functional urban areas or other type of urban areas. And I think it will be very relevant later on when we are having this seminar again in 5 years and reflecting on what cohesion policy supported in sustainable urban development. So I think on the monitoring front, we also have some tweaks. We will come back later. But basically, these are the main novelties of the next programming.
Thanks, that's really useful to know, Peter. My last question to you, if you could answer briefly, is we have cities and managing authorities on board. You've just given us a kind of summary of what's staying the same and what might be changing. So the question is, how can people best prepare, and how can they keep up to date with what you're talking about, with anything they need to know in terms of their preparations for cohesion policy and sustainable urban development?
I think the first and perhaps the most urgent need is to learn what challenges and issues needs to be tackled in the cities of a region or a member state. We have lots of member states and cities that are in the middle of analyzing territorial disparities, mapping investment needs, updating their policy frameworks and strategies. And I think this is one of the key first steps to programming, and also that all these actors who are doing the preparatory work should work in a partnership to define the investments for the next programming period. Second is that the programs, when it comes to the operationalization, they need to define the territorial focus to deal with. So they have to see if there are specific neighborhoods or cities with particular challenges in the region or in the targeted area, or they will incentivize functional area cooperation in the next time, or urban-rural linkages. This should be a key decisive point in the process. And last but not least, as I said, the key success factors. So improve the quality of the strategies, update the goals, check if they are still relevant. Think about the governance arrangements, like in the case of Brno. Think what could work better for the future. not only to have an integrated and participatory approach, but also in terms of project implementation, what can help to prepare and implement projects in a more efficient way. That would be the first step, and from the Commission side, we are looking forward to support this process, and the next period we will have the European Urban Initiative set up to harmonize all the support stream at EU level to cities. Also for sustainable urban development goals, we want to link what is happening at European cities to the global agendas. So we are happy to support building capacities, sharing knowledge, support innovative projects. So this is what we are eager to do in the future to assist managing authorities and cities in this process. And I think we can be well prepared for the next period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for being with us. I think that's really good advice that you gave there for everybody on board, for cities and managing authorities, to make sure your evidence base is up to date, your strategy is reviewed, so you're ready and prepared. There's lots that can be done right now to be preparing for the next period. So thank you so much for that, Peter. I'm going to move on quickly now because we're very close to the end. Could we bring up the next slide? And then perhaps I'm going to ask Carlotta if she wants to come in just briefly at the end here. We're coming to the end of this webinar, so what happens next is that we will be sending you a link to the content. This link already has the content from the first webinar on strategy. We'd like you to continue to make use of the Sustainable Urban Development Handbook. I don't know if Carlotta would like to come in and just talk about some of the actions that we think are important there. And I've heard Ivan wants to come in with one sentence. I'm going to allow that. So Carlotta first, and then Ivan very briefly, then I'll have a conversation with Ed about what's happening immediately. So Carlotta.
Yes. Thank you, Sally. Yeah, in terms of the action, the call for action, well, I invite everyone to look at our web tool strat board. I presented during my presentation, and to see if their cities, if their strategy is there, and also what are the possible connection with other strategy across the EU that uses similar territorial focuses. So you can maybe challenge your first choice and think about another possible territorial focus for the future. And I wanted also to make just a final comment, because I think that the seminar of today showed again the importance of the keyword integration. We discussed already about integration in the first webinar. We will do in the following one. In this specific case, we talked about territorial integration. That means that even if you have a very specific territorial focus, a very specific target area, you have always to consider the integration of this area with the surrounding one. So, for example, the connection between the neighborhood and the city as an entire entity, the connection between different municipalities in the functional areas, the connection between urban and rural areas within the same administrative boundaries. So for this reason, it's very important to work across scales, and I think that the other keyword is governance. And I think that in the next webinar, we will discuss extensively about the importance of governance and how to overcome a conflict and increase cooperation among actors.
Thanks, Carlotta. And I agree with you. As we go through these webinars, we see that these building blocks just totally fit together. You can't take one building block without the others. And integration seems to be one of the, like a piece of rock, it's written on the middle all the time. Ivan, I think, wants to come in with just one brief comment, please, Ivan, then I'm going to hand over to Ed.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to call again the attention to the recovery and resilience facility. In many countries of Europe, in the next 3 or 4 years, as many projects will be developed as 2 or 3% of the GNI each year. It's an absolutely fantastic amount of money. Unfortunately, not all national governments are talking with cities about how to spend the money. So for this reason, it is very important that cities and metropolitan areas prepare with good projects and strategies for this extraordinary opportunity, otherwise they will get lost. So I think the handbook gives a very good example, very good ideas how such integrated projects can be developed. So please do it.
Excellent advice there from Ivan. As always, be prepared also for the recovery funds and having good projects ready to go for those. Thanks, Ivan, for that. I'm just going to thank everybody from today's webinar. Fantastic inputs from our key speakers, really. So thanks to Sonia, Joanna and Casper. You've given us really rich insights. I'm sorry we made you stick to 10 minutes, but really interesting stuff you've given us from your cities and really relevant cases. Thanks also to Carlotta, to Ivan and to Peter for giving us your insights and reflections as well. And to Ed, my co-moderator, who I'm going to hand over to now with the final slide, please, to trail the next webinar.
Thanks a lot, Sally, and thanks to you also for keeping your cool in that bumpy start. So we got there in the end. Thanks to the audience for staying with us. Carlotta mentioned governance. These themes all click together. So on Friday, this Friday, 13th of November, please join us to hear from 3 different perspectives. We'll be hearing from the city of Cascais in Portugal, talking about multi-stakeholder engagement. From Zdenka Simonovic, who joined us earlier on the chat, we'll be talking about an aspect of multi-level governance, so Slovenian local authorities working together. Last but not least, the City of The Hague will be talking about CLLD, which Peter just referred to, which will remain a key instrument in the next programming period. So fantastic speakers today, fantastic speakers on Friday. Please join us for that session. And just finally from us, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your active contribution today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye. Have a good week. See you later.